The day I first stepped into Sun Studio, I didn't know it would be the start of a wild ride that would change my life forever. I was just a kid from Memphis, trying to make a buck and chase a dream. But when I sang, "That's All Right," into the microphone, everything changed. Dewey Phillips, the local DJ, played it on his show, and the phones at the station lit up like a Christmas tree. People were buzzing, and I was suddenly the talk of the town. Sun Studio was nothing fancy. It was just a small room with a few instruments and a recording booth, but it felt like magic. I remember stepping into the outer office, where Marion Kasker's desk was, and walking into the studio. Everything was so quiet, and the air was thick with the smell of old wood and fresh paint. I was nervous, but I knew I had something special inside me, something that needed to come out. The microphone I used that day is still there, and people can touch it. It's like touching a piece of history. I stood in the exact spot where I recorded my first single, and they even marked it with an X. Bob Dylan, one of the greatest musicians of all time, once kissed that spot. It's a small world, isn't it? I remember looking around the studio, seeing the guitars signed by other artists who had been there: Roy Orbison, Gene Simmons from Kiss, and so many others. It made me feel like I was part of something bigger, something that would last forever. The walls were lined with photos, and there was a huge picture of the $1 Million Quartet Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash, and Carl Perkins. They jammed together on December 4th, 1956, and it was a moment that people still talk about. There's even a Broadway show named after it. But it wasn't just the studio that changed my life, it was the music. Heartbreak Hotel was the song that really made me a star. It was written by me, Boren Axton, and Tommy Durden, who read a newspaper article about a man who killed himself and left a note that said, "I walk a lonely street." Axton thought it was a powerful image, and it became the foundation for the song. When I first heard the demo, I knew it was something special. The lyrics were haunting, and the melody was different from anything I had done before. But my producer, Steve Scholes, trusted me, and we decided to take the risk. The recording was a mix of different sounds. Scotty Moore was on guitar, Bill Black on bass, and DJ Fontana on drums. We also had Chet Atkins and Floyd Kramer from Nashville, and they added their own magic. Steve created the famous echo effect by recording in a hallway. The song was a hit from the moment it was released, selling 300,000 copies in just 3 weeks. The success of Heartbreak Hotel gave me the money to buy a home for my family. We moved into a 7-room ranch-style brick house on Audubon Drive. It was a big deal for us. I added a pool with a fish mosaic at the bottom, planted trees, and converted the garage into a pool house. I even had the halls wallpapered with a musical note and piano key motif. It was my little slice of heaven, and I thought we would be there for a long time. But life had other plans. The house on Audubon Drive was just the beginning. I was about to become a movie star, and my world was about to get a lot bigger. I traveled to Hollywood for a screen test with Hal Wallis, and he was impressed. I ended up signing a 3-picture deal with Paramount Studios. My first film, Love Me Tender, was a success, but the critics were tough on me. They said I wasn't a real actor, but I was just getting started. I had a lot to learn, and I was ready for the challenge. Hollywood was a different world, full of bright lights and big dreams. I was uncomfortable at first, but I made friends with actors like Nick Adams and Natalie Wood. I was still dating June Juanico, but being away from home put a strain on our relationship. It was a whirlwind, but I was living my dream. In between the movies and the tours, I kept making music. I performed Hound Dog on the Milton Berle Show, and it caused a storm. People were outraged by my performance, but I was just being myself. I didn't understand why it bothered them so much. It was just music, right, but the controversy only made me more famous. Then came the Steve Allen Show. Allen wanted to tame me, make me wear a tuxedo and stop moving. It was one of the worst moments of my career. I had to sing Hound Dog to a basset hound in a top hat and bow tie. It was humiliating, but I kept going. I knew I had something special, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. When I finally appeared on Ed Sullivan's show, it was a different story. The cameras zoomed in on me from the waist up, but the audience loved it. It was a record-breaking night, and I knew I had made it. But the Colonel, my manager, kept pushing for more money, and Sullivan got tired of it. He stopped inviting me on the show, but I was already a star. I was making movies, recording hits, and the world was my stage. That's how it all began, in a small studio in Memphis, with a microphone and a dream. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew I had to try. And that's how I became Elvis Presley. I remember the day I rode around Memphis with my new girlfriend, Anita Wood, in a black limo. It was like a dream come true. I was showing off, pointing to the life-size cut out of myself outside the Strand Theater, where they were promoting my new movie, Loving You. It was a big deal for me, and I wanted to share it with someone special. A few nights later, I rented the whole theater to show Loving You to my family and friends. I invited Anita as my special guest. Memphis was my home, and even though I was a big Hollywood star, I still felt a deep connection to the city. It was a great place to take a girl on a date, with its theaters, music halls, and parks. After Loving You, I started filming Jailhouse Rock. It was a different kind of movie for me. The film was in black and white, and I played a tough guy named Vince Everett, a guitar-playing convict. The dance sequence in the prison was really something. It was all about my signature hip movements, which I never really considered dancing, but it looked good on screen. Around this time, I got a new Gibson J200 guitar. It was a big deal because I had a special relationship with the OK Houck Piano Company on Union Avenue. They had been selling me guitars since 1955. The store was a hub for up-and-coming musicians, and it was where I bought my first Martin guitars. The store's manager, Sid Lapworth, was a big help. He sold instruments to many famous musicians, like B.B. King and Johnny Cash. Gibson wanted me to use their guitar, but Colonel Parker didn't want me to be tied to any brand. So, my friend Scotty Moore, who was signed to Gibson, got the guitar for me. I ended up paying for it, but it became my favorite instrument. I used it in Jailhouse Rock, GI Blues, and King Creole, and it's now at Graceland. With my career taking off, I decided it was time to move my family to a bigger, more private home. The crowds of fans and reporters at our old house were getting out of hand. I gave my parents a budget of $100,000 to find a new place. They found Graceland, a beautiful mansion in the Whitehaven neighborhood. It was originally a farm, but the Moores who owned it had turned it into a country home. The house had a musical history, and it was perfect for us. I paid $102,500 for Graceland, and I was excited to start decorating. I hired a decorator named George Golden, who had a unique way of showing his designs with miniature scale models. He and my parents, especially my mom, worked hard to make the house feel like home. One of the first things we did was build a fence to keep the fans away. The big gates with the musical motifs came later. Golden's designs were elegant and classical, but I added my own touches. I wanted the house to be a reflection of my personality. I put pink and red, flowered bedspreads in my room, and even installed a soda fountain that I got from a drugstore. We also got a lot of animals: horses, hogs, chickens, ducks, peacocks, and even donkeys. My dad used the pump house to smoke meat, and we had a small farm within our estate. Graceland became more than just a home. It was my sanctuary. It was where I could be myself, away from the cameras and the crowds. It was the place where I could be the king, surrounded by the people and things I loved. Even as my fame grew and my life became more complicated, Graceland was always my safe haven. When I step into Graceland, I'm immediately drawn to the ropes that block off the staircase. It's a bit eerie, knowing that upstairs are the rooms where Elvis lived his private life, like his bedroom and the bathroom where he passed away. Even when Elvis was alive, the upstairs was a secret place where only family and a few close friends could go. It's hard not to wonder what it was like up there. To the left of the staircase is the dining room. The floor is black marble, and there's a white carpet and a big chandelier hanging over the table. This is where Elvis used to eat and play poker with his friends. The room feels like a place where a lot of memories were made. On the right side, there's the living room. It's got a mirrored wall, a white leather couch, and lots of gold, blue, and white decoration. The room is divided from the music room by two big stained glass peacocks. The music room has a baby grand piano, and I can imagine Elvis playing late into the night with his friends. The kitchen is down here too, and it's where Elvis could keep an eye on everything. He had a bunch of video monitors above the breakfast bar to watch what was happening around the estate. There was even a red phone he used to call security if something seemed off. One of the coolest rooms is the jungle room. It used to be a patio, but Elvis turned it into a tropical hangout with plants and a weird, suitcase-sized phone from 1966. Elvis recorded some of his last albums in this room, which makes it feel really special. The billiards room is wild. The walls and ceiling are covered in pleated fabric, just like the couches. There's a big tear in the pool table, where someone tried a tricky shot. Elvis and his friends must have had a lot of fun in here. The TV room is where Elvis would hang out and watch multiple TV at once. There's a black velvet sofa with gold cushions and a big pull-down movie screen. It's like a mini movie theater, and you can almost see Elvis relaxing here after a long day. Elvis was really into racquetball, so he built a whole new part of the house with a court, a workout room, and a jacuzzi. The shower in there has 5 gold shower heads, which is just typical Elvis extravagance. Now, this area is a museum with a huge display of his gold and platinum records, and some of the jumpsuits he wore on stage. The grounds of Graceland are beautiful and peaceful, with big lawns and white picket fences. It's easy to see why Elvis loved living here. There's a shed where his dad Vernon used to work, and stables where Elvis kept his horses. His widow Priscilla still keeps horses there, and some of them are even descendants of Elvis's own. The last stop on the tour is the Meditation Garden. Elvis built this in 1964, and it's where he, his parents, and his grandmother are buried. There are simple stone markers and a small plaque for Elvis's twin brother, who is stillborn. It's a quiet, somber place that feels like a shrine. After the tour, I visit the Graceland Automobile Museum. Elvis loved cars and bought lots of them. There are over 30 on display, including a pink Cadillac for his mom, a purple Eldorado, and a red MG he drove in a movie. There are also motorcycles, go-karts, and even a tractor. It's amazing to see all the vehicles he owned. Outside, there are Elvis's 2 private planes. The bigger one, the Lisa Marie, is called his Flying Graceland. It's got a queen-size bed, gold bathroom fixtures, and a sound system with 52 speakers. The smaller plane, the Hound Dog II, is also pretty impressive. Across the street is the Heartbreak Hotel. It's a cool place to stay if you're visiting Graceland. Each room is decorated in a 1950s style, and there are special suites that look like rooms from Graceland. The jungle room lounge in the lobby and the heart-shaped pool are definitely things Elvis would have loved. Even though Elvis was a huge star, he still had to serve in the military. He was worried about his career and his mom, but he decided to join the army like everyone else. He said his goodbyes at a hospital in Memphis, and his mom Gladys was really upset. Elvis ended up being a good soldier and made some friends, but he was always homesick. Tragedy struck when Elvis's mom got very sick and had to go back to Memphis. She was admitted to a hospital and diagnosed with a serious illness. Elvis got leave to be with her, but it was too late. She passed away and Elvis was devastated. Her funeral was held at a local funeral home, and she was buried at Forest Hill Cemetery, not far from Graceland. Visiting Graceland is like stepping into a time capsule. Everything is preserved just as it was when Elvis was alive, and it's a place where you can really feel his presence. It's no wonder so many people come here to pay their respects and remember the king of rock and roll. I remember it like it was yesterday, March 7th, 1960, the day I came back to Memphis. It was snowing, and the whole city seemed to be waiting for me at Union Station. I had a lot on my mind. My mom, Gladys, was gone, and I felt like a piece of me was missing. But the crowd was loud and welcoming, and it felt good to be home. The colonel, my manager, was there, beaming with pride. He had big plans for me, and I was ready to get back to work. I had been in the army for 2 years, and a lot had changed. I made friends, traveled to places like Paris and Munich, and even learned some karate. I also met a special girl, Priscilla, who would change my life. But the biggest change was inside me. I was a bit more grown up and a lot less innocent. When I got back, the colonel was already working on my next projects. He had a suite at the Claridge Hotel, a fancy place on Main Street. That's where he ran things from. The Claridge was a hub for Memphis's social scene, and it was where the Colonel and I planned my next moves. He got me back into the studio, and we recorded Elvis Is Back. It was a hit, and I even made a movie called G.I. Blues. In the film, I played a soldier who wanted to open a nightclub. It was a mix of my real life and a bit of make-believe, but the biggest change was in my personal life. I had been seeing Anita Wood, a girl from back home, but things weren't working out. Priscilla, the girl I met in Germany, was always on my mind. She was different from anyone I had ever known. She was innocent, and she made me feel like I could be myself. We wrote letters to each other, and I couldn't wait to see her again. The Colonel had a lot of plans for me, but he didn't always understand my feelings. He wanted me to be the same Elvis that everyone loved, but I was changing. I started taking prescription drugs to help with my insomnia, and I was more interested in acting than singing. I wanted to do serious roles, but the Colonel thought the fans just wanted to hear me sing. It caused a bit of tension between us, but I trusted him to make the right decisions. Another thing that changed was my group of friends. I had a bunch of guys around me like George Klein, Red West, and Charlie Hodge. We called ourselves the Memphis Mafia. We were like a team, and we did everything together. The Colonel didn't like them very much, but they were my family. They were there for me, and I needed them. So I was back in Memphis, ready to start a new chapter. I had a lot to prove, and I was determined to do it. The city was buzzing, and I was ready to take on the world again. But deep down, I knew that things would never be the same. I was a different person, and I had a lot of growing up to do. But for now, it felt good to be home. I remember the days when life in Memphis was simpler, and the city seemed to revolve around places like the Arcade restaurant. The Arcade, down on South Main Street, was a spot where Elvis and the Memphis Mafia would hang out. It's an old place, built in 1919 by a Greek immigrant named Sparos Zapatos. The building has this cool, vintage vibe with its neon sign and blue vinyl booths. Elvis used to sit in his favorite booth, sipping malts, even before he became a big star. He worked as a driver for Crown Electric back then, and the Arcade was a perfect break from his day. But Memphis wasn't just about the good times. The city was changing, and the civil rights movement was heating up. African Americans were fighting for their rights, and tensions were high. Despite all that, Elvis and his friends still found ways to have fun. They often visited the Rainbow Rollerdrome, a skating rink where Elvis would play a game he invented called War. It was a rough game and people got hurt, but it was a way for Elvis to let off steam after his time in the army. Elvis also loved movies, but by the 1960s, he couldn't go to the theater without causing a scene. So he would buy out the entire Memphian Theater on South Cooper Street, just so he could watch a movie in peace. The Memphian is now a live performance venue called Playhouse on the Square, but they still remember Elvis and even offer tours during Elvis Week. Hawaii became a big part of Elvis's life too. He made movies there, like Blue Hawaii, and he even helped raise money for the USS Arizona Memorial with a concert at Pearl Harbor. After his time in Hawaii, Elvis decided to bring a bit of the islands back to Memphis. He decorated the Jungle Room at Graceland with furniture from the Jolly Royal Furniture Store on South Main Street. The store had this wild window display that reminded Elvis of Hawaii, and he bought it all on a whim. Elvis's personal life was also getting complicated. He was dating a girl named Anita Wood, but things were getting tense. Anita found a letter from Priscilla, another girl Elvis was seeing, and it all came to a head. Anita left Graceland, and Priscilla moved in. Priscilla finished high school at Immaculate Conception Cathedral High School, and she and Elvis eventually got engaged. Las Vegas became another important place for Elvis in 1963. He filmed Viva Las Vegas there and fell in love with the city. He also developed a close friendship with his co-star, Anne Margaret. The movie did well, and Las Vegas became a second home for Elvis. Back in Memphis, the civil rights movement was changing everything. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a big deal, but it didn't solve everything. There were still a lot of tensions, and Memphis was no exception. The city was at a crossroads, and life was never the same after that. But for a while, places like the Arcade and the Memphian were still islands of fun and familiarity in a rapidly changing world. I remember when the Beatles came to America in 1964. It was a big deal. They performed on The Ed Sullivan Show, and everyone was talking about it. The Beatles were so different from anything we'd seen before. They had this wild, fresh sound that made all the girls scream. Even I had to admit they were something special. A year later, in 1965, I finally got to meet them. It was at a house in Bel Air, a fancy neighborhood in Hollywood. The Colonel and the Beatles manager, Brian Epstein, set it up. I was a bit nervous at first because the Beatles were so popular, but they were just as excited to meet me as I was to meet them. We started off a bit awkwardly, but then I broke the ice by saying, "Look, guys, if you're just going to sit there and stare at me, I'm going to bed." Everyone laughed, and we started talking and jamming. Paul even gave me some tips on playing the bass guitar. It was a good night, and I remember feeling that we were all just music lovers, no matter how famous we were. But things were changing. The Beatles, along with other British bands like the Rolling Stones and The Who, were the new stars of rock and roll. They had a fresh, rebellious style that made my old act seem tame. I was also dealing with some personal stuff. I had started taking pills while I was in the army to help with insomnia and anxiety. It got worse over time, and I found myself relying on different drugs to stay awake and to sleep. My friends in the Memphis Mafia would help me get these pills, but it was becoming a problem. In 1967, I met Dr. George Nishapoulos, who everyone called Dr. Nick. He started treating me for my saddle sores from horseback riding, but soon he was prescribing me pills for my insomnia and other issues. Dr. Nick became a trusted part of my inner circle, but looking back, I can see that it wasn't a good thing. He gave me whatever I wanted, and I didn't see the harm in it at the time. Around Christmas 1966, I finally proposed to Priscilla. I had been putting it off for a long time, but her father was pushing me to do it. I got the rings from Harry Levitch, a jeweler I had known since high school. We got married in a small, secret ceremony in Las Vegas on May 1st, 1967. It was just us and a few close friends. We had a bigger reception at Graceland later, but some of my friends were upset that they weren't included in the real ceremony. After the wedding, Priscilla and I spent part of our honeymoon at the Circle G Ranch in Mississippi. We both loved riding horses, and it was a peaceful place to be. We also bought a house in Beverly Hills, close to the movie sets where I was spending more time, but the movies weren't going well. The songs were getting worse, and I was embarrassed by some of the material, like singing Old MacDonald in Double Trouble. The Colonel was finding it harder to get good deals for my movies, and I knew something had to change. In 1968, the country was going through a lot of turmoil. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy were assassinated, and the hippie culture was in full swing. People were changing, and I was starting to feel like a relic of the past. The Colonel decided we needed to do something to get me back on track. He arranged a TV special for NBC, but I was nervous about performing live again. Steve Binder, the director, had big plans for the show, and he wanted to film me jamming with my old bandmates. I was hesitant at first, but Binder convinced me to go for it. On the day of the live concert, I was so nervous that I almost backed out. But Binder gave me a pep talk, and I went on stage. The audience went wild, and I felt like I was back in my element. The show, called the '68 Comeback Special, was a huge success. I performed all my old hits, and I even did a medley of gospel songs. I ended the show with If I Can Dream, a song about peace and brotherhood. It was my way of saying something about the issues of the time, even though I usually tried to stay out of politics. After the show, everyone said I was back. It felt good to be the king of rock and roll again, even if the world was changing around me. I knew I had to keep evolving, but I was glad I could still connect with my fans. By the end of 1968, things were looking up for me, Elvis Presley. I felt like I had reclaimed my throne. I rented the Thunderbird Lounge, a hip nightclub in Memphis, for New Year's Eve. The Thunderbird was a hot spot, and it was where I had celebrated the previous year too. The club was opened in 1965 by Ernie Barisso, a former car salesman who had sold me a Ford Thunderbird back in 1961. He named the club after the car, and the cheap wine his liquor distributor partner was known for selling. The lounge had 2 rooms, a dance floor, and a bar. It was a place where future stars like Ronnie Millsap and Sam and Dave performed. The crowd was young and professional, even though they had to bring their own liquor. Ernie went on to open Club Caesar, one of the first discotheques in Memphis, which had a Roman theme with toga-clad staff. But on New Year's Eve, there was only one king in the Thunderbird Lounge, and that was me. I felt like I was back on top. Things were good with Priscilla and our new daughter, Lisa Marie, but the city of Memphis was facing tough times. On April 4th, 1968, the Lorraine Motel, a place known for welcoming African-American guests, became the site of a tragic event. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated there, while supporting striking sanitation workers. The Lorraine was a symbol of racial harmony, but King's death marked a dark turn for the city. The motel later became the National Civil Rights Museum, a place to remember King and his dream of equality. The city started to decline after King's assassination. People were leaving and businesses were closing. The Peabody, the Kiska, and many Beale Street clubs were among the casualties. Memphis, once a place of dreams, was now a place people were leaving. I felt the city's pain, and it mirrored my own struggles. In January 1969, I recorded at American Sound Studio in a rough part of North Memphis. The studio, run by Chip Smaman, was known for the Memphis sound, a blend of gospel, blues, and soul. My albums From Elvis in Memphis and Back in Memphis were a creative high point. They produced hits like In the Ghetto, Suspicious Minds, Don't Cry Daddy, and Kentucky Rain. The studio was in a tough neighborhood, but it produced some of the best music of the era. In July 1969, I returned to Las Vegas for an extended engagement at the International Hotel. The show was a big production with an orchestra, a rock band, and gospel backup singers. I wore karate-inspired outfits and made a dramatic entrance to the opening bars of Also Sprach Zarathustra from the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey. The show was a hit, and it marked a new chapter in my career. I was back on stage and it felt great. In 1970, I had a fascination with police work and badges. I even wrote a letter to President Richard Nixon, offering to help in the war on drugs. Nixon met me in the Oval Office and gave me a badge as a special assistant in the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. It was a proud moment for me, even though it was ironic given my own drug use. In March 1972, I recorded Burning Love, which became my last top 10 hit, but my personal life was in turmoil. Priscilla and I separated in February 1972, and I filed for divorce in August. The divorce was final in October 1973. The demands of my touring career and the long nights on the road took a toll on our marriage. Despite the challenges, I kept performing, and I was still the king of rock and roll. By the time the 1970s rolled around, my life had changed dramatically. After Priscilla and I split, I felt lost. Without the anchor of family, I found myself indulging more in the things that had always been a part of my life: drugs, late nights, and lavish spending. My body was showing the toll of years of overindulgence, and my health was starting to slip. I spent more time with the Memphis Mafia, the group of friends who had been with me through thick and thin. We'd often hit up the Gridiron restaurant late at night for cheeseburgers and colettas, for some of the best barbecue pizza in town. It was a way to feel normal, even if just for a little while. New girlfriends came and went. I had a fling with Sybil Shepherd, a Memphis native who became a big Hollywood star. But it was Linda Thompson who stayed with me the longest. We shared a love of gospel music, and she was there for me during some of the toughest times. My performances in the 1970s were bigger than ever. I played in huge venues like the Houston Astrodome and Madison Square Garden. Las Vegas became my second home, with the Hilton Hotel being a frequent stop. But the constant touring and the pressure to perform took a toll on me. I was admitted to the hospital a couple of times, and it was clear that something needed to change. In the summer of 1973, I recorded at Stax Records, a place that had produced some of the greatest soul music of the era. It was a way for me to connect with the roots of my own music, and to leave my mark on another iconic Memphis institution. I recorded 3 albums there raised on rock, Good Times, and Promised Land. Larry Geller, my spiritual advisor and close friend, was a constant presence during these years. He introduced me to meditation, yoga, and the world of New Age spirituality. I was fascinated by these ideas, and often turned to Jeller for guidance. But my other friends, and even Priscilla, sometimes resented his influence. Lowell Hayes, my personal jeweler, was another important part of my life. He crafted the TCB, taking care of business jewelry, that became a symbol of my inner circle. The TCB logo, a lightning bolt with the initials, was a way for us to feel connected and to remind each other to stay focused on what really mattered. Kang Ree, my karate instructor, was another significant figure. I had been studying karate since the 1950s, and he helped me achieve my 8th degree black belt. It was a way for me to stay grounded and to feel a sense of discipline in my life. But despite all the people around me, I was still struggling. I had moments where I wanted to make big changes, fire the colonel, improve my health, and find new, meaningful roles in movies. But it was hard to break free from the cycle I was in. By the mid-1970s, it was clear that the end was drawing near. My body was failing and my spirit was worn down. The last few years of my life were a blur of performances, hospital visits, and moments of clarity. I tried to make things right, but it was too late. On August 16, 1977, I left this world, leaving behind a legacy that would never be forgotten. My story is one of love, success, and the struggles that come with fame. But above all, it's a story of a man who always tried to find his way, even when the path was dark.